Well, good morning. And I am so excited to have two esteemed guests. I am just beyond, their biographies themselves are so, their background is so large that we could take an hour just going over that. Wonderful credentials. Tim Rasinski is a professor emeritus, a literacy education presidential scholar. In 2010, he's elected into the ILA Reading Hall of Fame, and more recently, Stanford University placed him, named him as one of the top 2% of scientists in the whole world. So when you say researcher, you're talking Tim. Dr. Lynne Kulich is a senior director at solutions engineering at Renaissance Learning. She's a former university professor, has had many, many different roles in literacy and roles at all levels. And think professional development when you say her name. She is an expert about that. She's sitting in a hotel room right now doing
I
that kind of
am.
thing. So, having introduced the two of you, um, we'll let each of you tell a little bit about yourself, and then I know Tim's going to tell us something about the origins of where this book came from. So, who wants to start?
Tim, you're welcome to start if you'd like.
All right. Uh, Sam, you already told a little bit about us, so I don't know what else we
Right,
can say
right.
here. You did mention the word when you introduced me as emeritus, and that means I'm retired. Although as you can probably tell, I'm still active in our profession, writing with great people like Lynn and David Harrison and others. But my main job right now is 7 grandkids. My wife and I just got through babysitting yesterday and today, and it's probably the best job ever. So I'm trying to keep my toes in both the grandpa mode and of course the professional one, and be talking about that in just a second. Lynn, how about you?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And such an honor to be here and especially always in Tim's presence. Really just a great role model for me in my professional career and even personally. But yeah, I'm an empty nester, kind of sort of, 3 young adult children, but my oldest son just started his first teaching job, 7th grade math, where we live. And so it made perfect sense for him to come. And as he tells his students, I live in my mom and dad's basement, and they laugh. But yeah, love being an educator. And, I was sharing with Sam, if I ended my career back in a first grade classroom, although, that's not what I'm doing now, I would be completely satisfied. It just first grade is my sweet spot. But I get to speak to educators around the country and even internationally about early literacy, particularly fluency.
Mhm.
So,
All right. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in and get us started. Um, and what we'd like to do is describe our new book. Came out just earlier this year. It's called The Fluency Development Lesson: Closing the Achievement Gap. The idea is seeing fluency as one of the critical elements for improving reading achievement, and yet it's often one that's been ignored, relatively ignored when compared to some of those other competencies such as phonics. Now, I've been in the fluency game for, I hate to say it, but well over 40 years. Back as a teacher, noticed that fluency was an issue with the kids I was working with, but did my dissertation study on reading fluency. And what I found was that working with third and fifth graders, fluency predicted a high amount of reading achievement in students. So that was sort of the takeoff for me. And what I started doing then was thinking about how do we teach fluency, and came across basically 5 essential elements or tools, we might call them. One is modeling fluent reading for our kids. Kids need to know what fluency is, so what better way to do it than to read to kids? A second is, the problem with that though is you're doing the reading, not the kids. So assisted reading, that's where students are asked to read, but they're given assistance in the form of somebody reading with them. That could be a parent, a teacher, an aide, maybe even a classmate. But that aid supports the student's reading and allows them to move into fluency. The third tool is wide reading. We know from research by Dick Allington and Anne Miguel Franson, that the amount of reading you read too is associated with achievement. We want to get kids to read as much as possible. But then that leads us to the fourth element, which is, of course, is repeated reading. When our kids who struggle are asked to read something once, oftentimes they don't read it very fluently, don't read it very well with good comprehension. And too often what we do is we just move on to the next text. But what we should do is ask kids to read it again. So let's read it again. Let's try it a second, or third, maybe even a fourth time until you can read it with good fluency. That's repeated reading. And of course, we all know from the work of Dr. J. Samuels and others that this is really an essential part. The estimates of the effect size on repeated reading are just enormous. And then the last tool is this, phrasing. If you think about the marker of a reader who's not very fluent, is that word by word reading, no expression, just very monotonous reading. And so what we've learned also is that fluent reading is in chunks, phrases and so on, and helping our students to see those phrases or chunks, those meaningful syntactic units, also leads to more fluent reading. So we came up with this idea. These are the 5 basic tools, and then by themselves, they're great. We recommend that teachers use them. But it came across to me 30 years ago. What would happen if you combined all these into a single lesson? That's called, you get synergy. Synergy means having something that's greater than the sum of the parts. All putting these together, you get something, a greater payoff than if you did each of them separately and then added them up. So the Fluency Development Lesson, as I first developed it, was a daily lesson in which the children are asked to master a text, relatively short, not terribly long. Poetry works especially well, and that's why Lynn and I have worked with David Harrison, poet laureate for the state of Missouri. And we just go through this daily process of beginning with the teacher reading this text to the students, maybe once or twice, maybe even 3 times, then reading it together chorally with students, asking the students to practice with a partner 2 or 3 times, and eventually getting to the point where they actually perform it. Part of what we often talk about is the art of teaching. And if you're going to ask kids to repeatedly read something, better give them a reason to do it. And the notion of performance, reading it for a classmate or for the class or the school principal. And then when we threw in a couple other things. One was a bit of word study. We took some of the words from that poem that the kids practiced and examined either the meaning of the words or perhaps the phonetic structure. And then the last element was, little reading in school is great, more reading at home is better. So let's take that poem home and practice it with mom or dad, grandma, grandpa, and of course get the positive feedback that parents are sure to give their kids. So that was the original lesson, and we did some early research on it. In fact, the National Reading Panel, you all remember that back in 2000, they identified the work that we did on the Fluency Development Lesson as evidence that fluency can be taught in a way that not only improves reading fluency, but also reading achievement overall. Now, the original lesson, as I described it, was kind of a one-day lesson. And fast forward a few years later, Lynn said to herself, I put some words in your head, and you can correct me when I turn it over to you, Lynn, but said, not all teachers have that kind of time to put it all into one day. What if we spread that out into 3, 4, or 5 days, so that we can, get that practice from one day to the next, to the next, to the next. And so Lynn took the Fluency Development Lesson to the next level. And has done some research with it too, and I'm sure she'll share that with you. So, Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you. What did you do with the Fluency Development Lesson?
Absolutely. So a little context. I was in Georgia at the time, actually teaching French to 1st and 3rd graders, but I was working on my master's degree in elementary ed, and I gobbled up everything I could get my hands on that Tim had written about fluency. And so it was during my graduate study, my master's degree work, that I discovered the Fluency Development Lesson. Well, I then moved back to Ohio and I started teaching elementary school English, not French. And I thought, I'm going to implement this fluency development lesson. But as Tim alluded to, what I did is, it's already packed with all of these evidence-based practices, like Tim mentioned, right? So I said, let's stretch it out to 5 days because we know we want them to continue to read that same text. And as Tim mentioned, I love to use poetry. But note to selves, you can use any text. And I think what's important to remember is that if you're a social studies, a science teacher, right, a math teacher, you can take story problems and have students, you can implement the fluency development lesson using story problems. You really can, because everyone's a reading teacher. So I built it out to 5 days. Used it with first, second, and third grade students, did some research studies on that, wrote some papers, presented, and essentially, they read the same poem every day, but each day there were different activities. So, oftentimes teachers say, well, don't they get bored reading the same thing? No, because you change up the activities, the purpose for reading, you change up the audience. Every day, was filled with new activities. And like Tim suggested, lucky listeners, students took it home. But also what I decided to do on Thursdays, when students took their poetry folder home, they had to read to somebody, even if it was a stuffed animal. There was a writing activity on the back, because reading and writing are synergistic. And when students read, they should write, and vice versa. So, I have to share just a snippet of a story. I was teaching third grade and using the fluency development lesson. And at the time in Ohio, third graders had to take a writing proficiency exam. And I remember one student in particular who would take that writing prompt on the back of the poem. So, essentially an 8x11 sheet of paper, and she would staple multiple papers to it as she answered the prompts, because I always included really complex prompts, where they had to answer multiple questions, because without them knowing it, I was preparing for them to succeed and get a proficient score on that writing test. And they all did. So I just remember that one student in particular. But what I found, we did things like poetry parties at the semester, the end of the year. We invited families in. And the fluency development lesson is not about memorizing. It's about getting them to read. So every time they read, they had that poem in front of them. And as Tim mentioned, we worked on phonics. We worked on phonological awareness. We developed vocabulary. We talked about the poet's message, right? We did listening and speaking and reading and writing and partner reading and all sorts of things. And I remember one year I had 27 first graders. 12 or 13 were deemed kind of at risk based on fall reading screening data. X number went to Title I. I had some at Reading Recovery, and I had 5 multilingual learners. And at the end of the year, they were all reading at or above grade level. No one needed Title I. They did not even need ESL services the following year. So nothing I used closed gaps and accelerated students like the fluency development lesson. And so, Tim and I like to be clear, this is a supplemental curriculum in essence, right? We're not saying that, you put your core curriculum away, by no means. But what's really nice is this is maybe a 15-20-minute lesson daily. And I know Tim says this all the time. Yes, we have to explicitly teach phonics, but we also have to explicitly teach fluency. And, I was just in Connecticut this week talking about the fluency development lesson. And I said to educators, I said, how do you explicitly teach fluency? And how do you scaffold so that students can read grade level text, even when that's not their independent reading level? And, no one mentioned fluency, and no one had, someone did mention, well, we do some partner reading. So it was really eye-opening, and it always is as I travel throughout the country, that teachers really aren't taught the evidence-based practices for teaching fluency. So we include all of that in our book. So it's got the 28 units. Each unit includes 5-day lessons. It's got Tim's amazing word ladders in it. So I always say, if you're a word ladder lover, you're going to find word ladders in each unit. And I think it starts off with the research, to explain the context and why we, are championing this particular evidence-based practice so much, because the evidence is pretty clear. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I'm going to interrupt and just mention that one of the things I love about the book is it's self-contained. The lessons are there that you can use at a variety of different grade levels. The texts are there. The follow-up activities are there. And of course, the way we thought of it as we designed the book was that this would be something that once you got through with the book, you've got that lesson inside your head and you can apply it with any text going forward. So it's in a sense, it's a bit of a primer on the fluency development lesson, but that's all you need.
That's all you need.
So, yeah. So hopefully it might draw more attention to the importance of fluency and how teachers can do it both artfully and scientifically.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'd like to chime in for just a moment. I've had some use of this kind of thing myself, and I'm trying to change the view so we're a gallery view. And all I can say is, wow, yes, oh, wow. I'm going to be talking in the spring to some people up in a conference in Missouri, and they're mainly secondary teachers. And like, what on earth do you do with these older kids? And one of the first things I say is, well, take a look at this, because it's just amazing. And I'm going to put an idea out there called reading to perform. Now, if a student is reading to perform, that really changes the game a lot. And how do you get them to read to perform? And Tim, you have come up with just a brilliant way. Well, you take the same piece and you go through it, and the kids love it. And I really want to stress, because I talk to teachers of both younger and older children, that this especially is wonderful for the older children. And I'm going to do a little bit of name dropping here. Um, uh, Ann Kay and Eric Litwin and some of the other people right now that are talking about using music, and music and song is just another good reason to do performance-based reading. And then those folks in England that Tim made me aware of, and the work they're doing there. So overall, this idea of reading to perform and giving them that reason to want to perform makes a huge difference. And I've worked with my own kids, working in an elementary building, and I've seen it work in other places, and just that whole idea. So I think that this is a game changer. And having put that giant plug in there for especially the music people, I will also mention that David Harrison will be on my blog next week talking about poetry. So your missing author is missing because he wanted to do that separately. So that will be coming up, and this is a game changer. I'll just say that to you and see what you say back.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. We've used it in our reading clinic now for over 20 years. We call it the core reading lesson. And these are all struggling readers, grades 1 all the way up to middle school. And we find kids in 6 weeks making, in some cases, upwards of a year's progress in reading. And not just in fluency, word recognition, comprehension. When you can read fluently, you're more likely to understand what it is that you read. One quick comment, Sam, that notion of performance, I love that you mentioned that. And that's, the heart of this fluency development lesson. If you're going to perform something, you have to rehearse it, right? And rehearsal is essentially another name for repeated reading. You're practicing a text over and over again. But here's the difference between that and the kind of repeated readings we sometimes see in classrooms. The kids are not repeatedly reading a text to read it fast. That's often the goal, for improve your DIBEL scores. No, you're practicing it to read with expression, so that an audience member person audience would find a satisfying performance and a meaningful performance from you. So it's not just the aim is not just speed, it's reading with fluency. We're reading with meaning. So and again, that notion of artfulness is so essential to that.
Yeah. And I would add, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, not only did I use this evidence-based practice with my own classroom students, I also used it in my doctoral research with multilingual learners. They were refugee children from Burma, and I worked with them for about a year and a half and saw incredible progress. I would meet with them after schools and in the summer, and this is all that I would do with them is, the extended fluency development lesson, and the progress they made, was incredible. Not only, obviously reading in English, but it did a lot for their social emotional well-being. And we know that research says, when kids can read, that impacts them, their SEL, SEB, all of that. So yeah, it's just, I can't say enough about it. And I to mention again, the artfulness of it and the joyfulness. There is nothing I did that I had more fun doing than when it was time to do, as I like to say, the FDL. The kids and I had a blast. We would record mystery readers by Friday. They were so good at reading it. And, as Tim and I said, they're practicing and performing it. And by Friday, we're ready to have some fun with it. And, I would tape record mystery readers and the students would have to guess who did the reading and the kids would disguise their voices. It was just so much fun. And I would tape record them reading on Monday and we'd tape record them on Friday and play it back, right? Because we're always talking about the importance of sharing data with students. Let them hear how they sounded on Monday compared to Friday, right? The progress is evident. So it's just so much fun. So much fun.
Okay,
So,
Sam, I've got to ask $1 million question here. We're in an era of super focus, hyper focus on phonics. And you're both well qualified researchers. Any evidence that this kind, and I already know the answer, any evidence that this kind of practice results in improved sound symbol relations and, more importantly, the use of sound symbol relations? Any evidence of that at all?
Yeah, short answer, yes.
Yeah.
I have on my website, timrasinski.com, several studies that we've published that have shown that to be the case. In fact, I'll actually go back to Dr. J. Samuel's work with repeated reading. He found that when kids engaged in repeated reading, the focus isn't on phonics, but their phonics or their word recognition improved as well. So, and it just goes, just makes sense, doesn't it? You read something repeatedly, purposefully, you learn to recognize the words better.
Yeah. And I would add, in 2021, Duke and Cartwright came out with the active view of reading, and the two of them and, oh gosh,
I know.
I know. All of a sudden, I'm drawing Burns, Dr. Matthew
Burns.
Yes, thank you. They did a study, and this is pretty amazing. And they were very clear, this is an initial study and more needs to be done. And I would love to do more research in this area. They looked at all the types of evidence-based interventions, if teachers intervene by focusing specifically on phonics or focusing on phonemic awareness. And fluency, they've kind of coined a bridging process. And when teachers focused on fluency as an intervention, it had the greatest overall impact in improving students' reading comprehension. Yeah. And that study came out in 2023. So definitely want to Google that and look it up because that's a real recent study.
Yeah, the effect size, if I'm not mistaken, was almost twice as much as for phonics and word recognition. So,
absolutely.
I'm not saying that phonics isn't important, but
it is, but it's not the
cross that bridge. Yeah.
Yep, okay. Not the only.
Hey, Sam, quick question. Can you allow me to share my screen?
Oh, absolutely. Let me do the little advance multiple and share.
Okay. Everybody talk with each other.
Okay. And
Yeah.
I learned yesterday
Yeah,
that
go
if
to
I
the share
make
the
you,
screen thing.
are you able to share yet?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
And
well, it's all you.
what I was going to do was, can you see
Oh,
my
Yes.
screen?
yes.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that my copy of the book is in my office, and it'd be easier just to show you to you this way. And I know Lynn is in a hotel room in her
Yes.
travels, but I just wanted to share what the book looks like. The Fluency Development Lesson, Closing the Reading Gap. It's available on Amazon. It comes with, I believe, a study guide. So
Yeah.
if any groups of teachers wanted to go together and work through it, there's a guide. So I just wanted to make sure you had a view of what this book looks like. So I'm going to stop share and give it back to you.
Okay. We're getting to that point where we talked about where it's getting close to the time when we need to stop. We could go on for hours. We really could. With the depth of knowledge that you two have and the depth of experience, we really could go on for hours. But here's my final question, and that is and this is to each of you. Anything that we wish we had said that we haven't said yet, or anything that we want to especially make note of as we finish up. So I'll turn that over to the two of you who wants to jump in first.
Yeah, I can go as it's top of mind. I want to emphasize the importance of using grade level text when you're teaching fluency, right? Fluency is that scaffold. So when you have students who are reading below grade level based on your data, you often think, oh, there's no way they can read that grade level text. They absolutely can with the right scaffolds, and fluency is that scaffold. So, Tim?
Yeah, I'll follow up on that. Steve Stahl did that work, among others, that found kids made the greatest progress with fluency instruction when the material was at their challenging level. So, if you're a third grader reading at a first grade level, give them that third grade material. But like as Lynn suggested, the support in the fluency development lesson allows kids to achieve success. And of course, that's what we want kids to do, achieve success at their own grade level. We don't want to have third graders reading at a first grade level.
Right.
So, yeah. So,
Okay.
and the other thing would just simply be that, we hope that teachers would give this a try.
And they asked for it. I mean, this is really the premise of how it came about, because they said, oh my goodness, do you have lessons already created with the poetry? And
Yeah.
so I went to Tim and said, Tim, giddy up, we got to do this. So.
Yeah. And the way David wrote the poetry, they're grouped together into themes that are content related. So you get a bonus there as well.
Yeah. Well, my listeners are going to hear all about that from David next week. And I'll put in a final little plug here is I just happen to own a copy of this book. And I want to say to my teacher friends, everything you need, or there's enough there for you to make really good use of it. There are teacher scaffolds here, folks, and so it's a really good investment that I hope a lot of my listeners decide to take advantage of. Now, there's a final Bomarito tradition. Tim's very aware of this. Lynn, not so much, but you're about to find out. We have to, first of all, put on a giant smile. We're both doing that. And then with that giant smile, we give a Zoom wave goodbye as we say goodbye to our listeners. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you both so much. This has been so enlightening. And goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.